Nate, we are back. Finally, it's been a minute for us rocking together. We are back diving into a mock draft, looking ahead to 2024. We're bored with the 2023 season already. We want to see what's going on in 2024 rookie drafts. This is interesting. We have questions. I have a lot of questions with this class. This class is looking pretty sus to me, but we're going to get into it today. I want to kick it to you with your first pick. And before we do that, though, be sure you like the video, comment down below what do you think of this class so far? What are your questions, comments, concerns, complaints? Who are some of your favorite players in this class? So on and so forth. If you want to dive into more of that with us, hop in the Patreon Discord, patreon.com/Dynasty Rewind to get a free week trial. Chill with us. Come chop up this class with us that much more. But with that said, now let's get to the content that people came for. Nate, with your first pick, has there been any wavering for you? Because I know in the consensus sphere of public opinion, there is concerns with the projected 101 in rookie drafts and the NFL draft. I see who you picked here, but tell me your thoughts on your 101.
Yeah, Bob, I'm not buying into this narrative. We're overanalyzing Caleb Williams. We did the same thing, anytime a generational prospect comes out. We did it with Trevor Lawrence. And you can talk about if you're happy with his NFL play at this point or not. But coming out of college, Trevor Lawrence is, a top prospect. Andrew Luck, we've done it with all these guys. We overanalyze them because we've seen them be good for so long. And Caleb Williams still, you go and you hear this, oh, he's not great in structure. No, he's incredible in structure. We just have been focusing so much on what he's able to do outside of structure as well. He's a great quarterback in all aspects of the game. Statistically, he's still at the top of the nation. Efficiency, he's still at the top of the nation. There's really not much to debate here. There's plenty of other players we can talk about. Caleb Williams, we don't need to nitpick nearly as much. I mean, sure, there's things he can work on as any prospect can, but I don't need to hear this narrative of him not being worthy of the 101.
Yeah, I tend to lean towards this being a lot of prospect fatigue as well, and just being kind of an easy target, with, how he tends to or can rub people the wrong way with things he says, how he acts and whatnot. But on the football field, still an incredible talent. And when you get into other prospects in this class, like you kind of touched on, especially at the quarterback position, everybody has question marks. Everybody's going to have question marks. He still put up great numbers over the first 3 seasons of his college career, leading into what we expect to be an NFL debut or an NFL declaration for the draft. At this point, I think there's definitely risk that you're taking on, but any quarterback you're taking on risk, any draft pick you're pretty much taking on risk. The only way to get a sure thing is to trade the pick away, which we're not doing here today. But Caleb Williams, I'm still with you on this one. Still think he's a fine pick here at number 101. I will say that if we're talking about safest players in the draft, I'm going to go with my second pick here. I'm going to go Marvin Harrison Jr. I think we're still pretty chalk at this point. And this is because I do believe he is an exceptional wide receiver, obviously, but also boils down to being what I believe to be a bulletproof prospect. And then when we look at the other top quarterback in the draft, I'm not entirely sold on yet. I've been pretty vocal about that, but I will say it was more of a consideration this time around than it has been in the past for me, looking at my second pick versus my third or what I'd pick at this point. But Marvin Harrison Jr. really does it all, plays inside, outside, can do it all as a wide receiver, no glaring holes to his game, has still been able to produce this season despite Ohio State's passing game not being as good. You can't really say enough about how he's going to be, especially when he gets to the NFL. He's going to be valued probably as a top 5 wide receiver out the gate. And just from that aspect of, where he lands, is obviously going to play a role to how long it takes him to get to that threshold if he does. But just purely off a value point here, I think this top 3 is pretty locked in, and then we get into some big question marks. Feel free to touch on Marvin Harrison Jr. if you feel the need, or dive into your pick 3, your second pick here. Where are you going?
Yeah, I love Marvin Harrison. Not too much to add there. I think there's a little bit of the same thing happening with him as well, with a little bit of prospect fatigue and a little bit of the fact that the Ohio State quarterback, Colin McCord, while he's been decent, he hasn't been to the level of Ohio State quarterbacks we've seen in the years past, with that high-powered offense in that passing game. So, haven't seen that, but the numbers have still been incredible for Marvin Harrison. He's a great pick at the number 2 pick, and I'm actually pretty upset about it. But I still get to pick Drake May here with a 3rd pick. I'm not going to be too upset about having 2 of the top quarterbacks, the 2 top quarterbacks. I don't think anyone fits into the top 2 outside of these 2 guys. They're pretty stuck in there at this point. The NFL loves guys that can make big plays, and we talked about how Caleb Williams can do that. Drake May can do that just as, almost just as well. His ability to run the football on the ground, is very underrated. His ability to hit the deep ball is one of the best in the NCAA right now. Currently first in the NCAA with deep yards with 1,399, fifth in big time throw rate at 8%, and tied ninth with turnover worthy plays, with only 1.8% of his throws being turnover worthy. So a guy that can go down the field and not turn the ball over, NFL teams are going to love that. They love what they've seen with Drake May. You know, some people have been talking about possibly him as the quarterback one in this class. I'm not there myself, but I do think he's a really, really good quarterback two in this class. In many other classes, he would have been the quarterback one. So if you have the third overall pick and you're stuck with Drake May, I think you can still be pretty happy.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I think there's a clear cut, like I mentioned, top three here. This is where it cuts off, and this is where things can get really interesting.
Yeah.
And I'm going with a wide receiver that you hit on early in the process coming into this year's analysis or this year's college season when we did a mock draft way back when. I'm going with Malik Nabers here. And Malik Nabers, I think, is a heck of a lot closer to Marvin Harrison Jr. than he is to the next wide receivers that we'll talk about. I think there's a pretty clear tier gap here with the wide receiver position. The number one thing that sticks out to me with Malik Nabers, when you look at him, his frame is so imposing, but he's not like that big. Like he's listed on PFF at 6 foot 200 pounds. But the production he's put on tape this year, going for 1,400 yards, 12 touchdowns as of the time of this recording, just an incredible jump from last year not having a bad season by any stretch, but having 1,000 yards and only 3 touchdowns, most of that over the last 4 games of the season, like we discussed prior. You know, this is a guy I wanted to see it with, and I've definitely seen it. You know, kind of a guy who I don't think has a ton of holes to his game, can play short, can play deep, can make plays after with the ball in his hands after the catch. I don't have a lot of bad things to say about Malik Nabers, you know, one of the wide receivers I don't have a lot of questions about in this class. Yeah. And granted, there's a good few. This is a great wide receiver class. And, you know, with how wide receivers are starting to be valued in Dynasty, I think he's a guy who's probably looked at as a top 15 option, if not top 12, top 10, because we saw guys like Jackson Smith and Jacob Jordan Addison being valued as top 12 guys. Maybe not Jordan Addison, but definitely JSN being valued as top 12 guys in Dynasty. And I take Malik Nabers over both those guys right now. Malik Nabers is an insane player. I know. And
I haven't heard you talk down about JSN in the last year.
Keep in mind, that's not talking down on JSN. That's just talking up on Malik Nabers. Big fan of Malik Nabers. I've been converted. And I mean, you just look at his game by game, you know, 67 yards first week, 87 yards, 239, 130, 102, 146, 89, 121, 170, 132, 140. Just an insane player. Great, you know, getting plenty of receptions each game. He's not just making big breakaway plays, and that's the end of it. He's having consistent, elongated performances over games, not just splash plays. Big fan of Malik Nabers, and I'm excited to get him here at 104. And I think when you get into this next tier, there's a couple of guys, and this is the one I really want to get. But feel free to add on to Malik Nabers at all. You were on him well before anyone that I know of being really in on him, and I'm definitely on board as at this point, and I think it'll stay this way. I don't see anybody coming for wide receiver 2 at this point outside of Malik Nabers. Be free to touch on that or dive into the next pick.
I'm going to dive into my next pick because I think we have a guy that can shoot for that wide receiver 2 position in this draft class. You know, Malik Nabers, an incredible talent. But, Bob, I love Rome Odunze.
I like me some Rome Odunze as well.
You know, this guy is 6'3", 215 pounds, so he's got the size. And we have seen kind of a move away from these bigger body wide receivers. But I really do feel that this is one of the first draft classes we've had a while where we have those bigger body wide receivers that play a modern style of wide receiver in the NFL. You know, these aren't just I'm going to go down the sideline, win the contested catch, and fall down, and then we're going to move the chains. Those guys are out of the league. You know, we saw some of those guys over the past, couple of years through the NFL draft fall and then just not be able to produce. So now if you're that big body wide receiver, you got to be able to create separation. You got to be able to create yards after the catch. You got to have maybe even have a talent in special teams with kick returning. And Rome Odunze fits all of that. He can do all of it. He's tied 6th in the entire nation with 13 contested catches. And he doesn't catch anything on the screen. Only has 9 screen catches all year, which is tied for 179th. So this is a guy that plays outside. He wins down the field, average depth of target of 16.6 yards. 11 touchdowns, 1,200 yards as of recording, 103 targets. I mean, this guy has been the wide receiver one for Michael Penix Jr. and the Washington Huskies, and they have had an incredible offense this entire year. He's one of the higher graded wide receivers on PFF, and he has a kick return touchdown this year. 6'3", 215 pounds. You can make people miss. You can win catches down the field. You can help out on special teams. NFL teams love this guy. I think there is like a top 3 at the wide receiver position this year with Marvin Harrison, with Malik Neighbors, with Rome Odunze. I think that's a tier right there. I think there's a lot of other guys right after that tier that, are really good. But these 3 guys right here, I think, are some of the best wide receivers in the nation right now. And I'm excited that they're all going into the NFL draft at the same time.
Yeah, I want to touch on with Rome Odunze because I'm with you. I like him a good bit as well. Not as much as another wide receiver out of the Pac-12 that I like a lot.
I know.
But I'm a little biased there, I guess. But with Rome Odunze, you touched on his special teams capability. And I think the reason people sometimes tune out when they hear that, because I used to as well, when I like, oh, who cares? Like, that doesn't get me points in fantasy. When you think about it, they're putting that player on special teams because they are able to not only be reliable and, be able to catch the punt, not muff it, not give it back to the other team, but they're putting them in a situation to create yardage. And because they can navigate through traffic with the ball in their hands, that's something I think Rome Odunze does really well. Yeah. And while he's this bigger body that listed at 6'3", 215 currently on PFF, that'll possibly change. Maybe it won't, maybe it will. As we get official numbers and whatnot. But like you touched on, with his frame, with a lot of these bigger bodied guys, that's not as much of a concern. These guys are nimble, they're athletic, they have agility, and they have ball skills. And when you wrap all these together, that's when wide receivers get really exciting and can be viable at the next NFL level. I think, we need to break out of, and I'm not saying we do this, but just in general, I think the consensus of evaluating players is just, oh, this guy's an amazing athlete, but he has no ball skills. I want to focus so much more on the guys that just have great ball skills and good enough athleticism that they can be like a Rome Odunze. I'm not saying he's not an athlete, but you get what I'm saying, that has the ball skills and then can do this stuff as an athlete. That's what we want to try to find a blend of, I think, going forward, and try to get away from these rough shot athletes that, are freaks when you compare them. Yeah, Chase Claypool. You get Treylon Burks in that conversation. Ooh. You could get Quentin Johnston in that conversation. Johnston in that conversation, but that's for another day.
And it's like, going back to the special teams thing. Like, I don't think that NFL team's going to select Rome Odunze in the first round and then have him return punts.
I hope
probably not. But like you said, it shows that the NCAA coaches want to get the ball in this guy's hands.
Yeah.
Nick Saban, Jalen Waddle was returning punts. Devonta Smith was returning punts. They want to get, in college, they're not going to just have a little punt return guy. If they have a top guy that can do something, they're going to get the ball in that guy's hands. Yeah. So I always love to see these wide receivers get involved in this way. And to be honest, I didn't expect Rome Odunze to, have a experience in the kick return game and be able to make an impact in that way. And when I saw that, really changed my my perception of him.
Yeah, it's definitely a feather in his cap for sure. And I'm going to make a pick that's probably a little out of my, usual theme here. Well, I'm pivoting away from wide receiver, and I'm not drafting the tight end you're thinking of. I'm actually going to go running back here because I feel like the field is slim with good running backs in this class. And I think there's probably a standout one right now. I'm looking at Treyvon Henderson here out of Ohio State. Has battled injuries over the past couple seasons, ended up battling him again this year, started off reasonably okay, but that injury bug got him again, and we want to get away from that. Since that injury, he's been pretty solid since coming back from that. But this is a guy who has the speed, has the burst, has the vision, all of the things we want in a running back, can catch the ball as well. Was highlighted definitely in his freshman year and is being highlighted this year as well. Last year, not so much while he was battling those injuries. But I think this is a guy who profiles as a, it's going to sound gross when I say this, but profiles as a committee back. I don't think he should be the primary option. I think he should be, have your banger, have your Treyvon Henderson. And then, this is the guy who's kind of the spark plug to the offense while the other guy's grinding out tough plays between the tackles. Use this guy on your zone runs. Leave the gap runs in between the tackles to somebody else. But and part of the reason, like I said, the reason why I'm drafting him this early ahead of players I like a lot is because I think the field is slim on running backs, and I think that's going to shoot him up boards. I think you're going to have to make an earlier pick on Henderson than you want to, unless something really unforeseen happens with the running back situation, because the running backs have not panned out like we were hoping, but just kind of by attrition, Henderson finds him in my RB1 slot at this point. But Nate, feel free to touch on Henderson or dive into your next pick. I think this one's a pretty chalk pick.
Bob, you hit the nail on the head. There's one running back that I feel comfortable with. I have one running back in my top 10. I'm at this point, and it's Treyvon Henderson. So good pick there. But you did leave a pretty good player for me on the board, Brock Bowers, number 1 tight end in this class, number 1 tight end in college over the past 3 years. Listen to this, Bob. Since coming in as a true freshman into the SEC, into Georgia, all right, on PFF, third highest graded tight end in 2021, 4th highest graded tight end in 2022, and this year, 3rd highest graded once again. So he's been top 5 tight end in the league the entire time he's been in college from a true freshman. And the stats are incredible. We talked about him on this channel before, but as a true freshman, 56 receptions, 882 yards, and 13 touchdowns. You know how many wide receivers would love to have those stats as a senior in college? And he's out there doing it for a national championship team, being the number 1 weapon. And just to go on top of what we've already seen, incredible production. He has an ankle injury this year. We think he's going to be out the rest of the season. He gets surgery on it, so it's a serious one. He's back in about 3 weeks and putting up numbers and just being, once again, the number 1 threat on the Georgia offense. Like he never skipped a beat. So, a lot of people were calling for Brock Bowers to just take the season off at that point. They're like, well, what's he have to gain at this point? He only has something to lose. Well, Kirby Smart, their head coach, came out and said, that's totally backwards. By Brock Bowers coming out here and showing that he is healthy, and the fact that he only had to take 3 weeks off for a surgically repaired ankle, and he's not skipped a beat, he's made money. NFL teams look at that. NFL players are different. We know that. And an NFL team that sees something like that, they know they're getting the guy with a dog in them. And I mean, no pun intended, because he plays for the Bulldogs, but teams are going to love Brock Bowers, especially with how we've seen the tight end position really become a focal point for offenses and in the NFL draft of the past couple of years. Brock Bowers, top 10 pick in the NFL draft this season, number 1 tight end, no questions about it. Very happy to pick him up in the first round.
Yeah, no, 100%. We've touched on his production. I mean, right now through 12 games, and not even playing 12 games, he's only played looks like 9 games. And as of the time of this recording, still has 664 yards, which for most tight ends is like a career year. Looking back at his 2 previous years, 882 yards, 942 yards. There's no tight end in college with this level of production. 664 right now is looking like a down year. He still has games to play. He has at least this week that we're about to witness now ahead of us, championship game, probably playoff games as well. He's probably still going to rack up 800 yards. I think that's pretty safe to say, even though he's probably a little limited with that injury, but he's still racking up receptions. And like you said, just coming out there, just, being such an alpha player to just get out there and play through the injury and get back on the field quickly. Just so impressive. Just checks every box. People are going to rag on about his size, quote unquote, his weight being a little smaller than most prototypical tight ends. At the end of the day, you have to take Brock Bowers for what he is, and that's just an elite talent. And that's what you're getting at tight end. As long as he gets put into an offense that's actually going to use him properly. And, a lot of people, I think, are going to try to draw lines between Brock Bowers and Kyle Pitts. And these two are not the same player. No. Purely from even when you just look at production standpoint, Brock Bowers has had a much elongated, consistent career of production as opposed to Kyle Pitts, who had one really good year and then went to the NFL as praised for his size and athleticism. And obviously ball skills play a role in that too. But Brock Bowers, just an all-around great piece to have. And, I'm still hesitant to draft him super early, but I think at the 7th spot in a super flex draft, until we know how these quarterbacks kind of play out, is pretty solid. I think you're dealing with some really good talent up here in the middle of the round. And quarterbacks, how they pan out, like we're kind of talking about, and we'll discuss throughout this video, could make him even more of a value at some point because, unless you're in a tight end premium, as good as Brock Bowers is, it's probably more worthwhile to draft one of these other positions if, a Jaden Daniels, Michael Penix Jr., Bo Nix, any of these guys go top 10.
Yeah.
Realistically should go ahead of Brock Bowers. We don't know that yet. We're kind of projecting them to be mid to late first round picks or even second round picks, day 2 picks, whatever it may be, for that grouping. We'll get into that as we go along. But with that said, you take Brock Bowers, which is fine. I'm willing to lose out on Brock Bowers, quote unquote, to go get my favorite, my guy for this incoming rookie draft. I'm looking at Troy Franklin out of Oregon. Just easily one of my favorite players, very early on in the process, looking into him, pegged him as just a guy I really enjoyed watching. I think just in our Discord, even we've had concerns from Oregon fans of, not being a super polished route runner underneath, working intermediate and things like that. I don't see a lot of that with Troy Franklin. I don't see a lot of the concerns, and maybe that's just because I'm not watching every single game as intently as an Oregon fan is, and that's okay. We'll get looking into more games as we go on. I haven't missed a ton of games. I'm kind of a quote-unquote bandwagon Oregon fan at this point. Love Troy Franklin. I'll be talking about a couple other Oregon Ducks throughout this video more than likely as well. But definitely love Troy Franklin. You look at his production this year, has had a total of 4 games under 100 yards. And one of those games was 99 yards. And has had a total of 2 games this entire season without a touchdown. Comparing to last year, had 9 touchdowns over the season, has 14 this year. Yards per reception has ticked up every single season for him, was around 11 in his first season, 14 last year, 17.5 this year. Yardage has gone up. Everything has proved better and better. You look at his passer rating when thrown to, almost perfect at a 150.4. That's an NFL passer rating when thrown to. And this is Bo Nix guy, and has, made, you could always get to the argument of who made who. And I think both these guys are just darn good talents. And, Troy Franklin will probably get ragged for his size, has that Slim Reaper build, but you look at him, he's no pushover. He's not some, 160 pound soaking wet guy. He's listed at 6'3", 187. I think he probably comes in a little shorter, but the weight I think is right around there. And I think he's bulked up even more over the course of the season. He looks great. I am not concerned about his size by any stretch of the imagination. I want him on every single one of my rosters I can get in. I can't get enough late first round picks because I think that's where he's going to end up going in rookie drafts. I'm probably the highest anyone will be on Troy Franklin when it comes to Superflex rookie draft next season. So this is probably the highest you'll have to grab him at pick 8 here. But with that said, Nate, feel free to dive into your next pick. Love this one as well. Or feel free to touch on Troy Franklin if you want to get in on the love fest at all. Feel free to touch on the next one.
Troy Franklin's a great pick there. I talked about that tier after Marvin Harrison Jr., Malik Neighbors, and Rome Odunze. I think Troy Franklin's very much in that tier. And another guy who's in that tier I'm picking right now with the 9th pick here is Emeka Egbuka out of Ohio State. He hasn't gotten on the field quite as much as we wanted to see him this year. He's only played in 8 games so far, missed a couple games with injury. But Ohio State just keeps doing it. They keep putting out great wide receivers. Egbuka really fits the mold that we've seen a lot of their wide receivers come out recently, where they're really good route runners, able to create yards after the catch. He's going to work a lot closer to the line of scrimmage than a guy like Marvin Harrison Jr. His yards per reception this year is 13.3. So he has gone down in yards per reception every single season, starting out his freshman year with 21.2, then 15.6 last year, down to 13.3 now. So we're kind of seeing that usage get closer to the line of scrimmage, and I think that fits where he's going to be used. Also is a bit of a product of the offense and the quarterback this year. He creates those yards after the catch most of the time, and that's where his bread and butter is going to be. He's going to be not someone that has to play in the slot, someone that can play a little bit of both, but NFL teams are going to love players like this where they can, use them in the screen game, use them on crossing routes, use them to just move the chains and create something, when they need, a play on 3rd and 6 or something like that. Emeka Egbuka is going to be a first-round wide receiver, I think, at worst, very early day 2. But, with the work that Brian Hartline has done over there at Ohio State and the products, the NFL products that they've been able to put out over the past years, we do say we don't want a helmet scout. But there is something to be said for development of talent, and especially at certain positions. Look, Iowa, they put out good tight ends. Ohio State, they put out good wide receivers. There's coaches there that know what they're talking about. They know what they're doing. And Emeka Egbuka, he's got the talent. He's been developed really, really well. And when he goes into the NFL, I do expect him to be a first-round pick, a guy that, teams are going to love to pepper with targets if they don't have another alpha on the other side.
I love Egbuka as well, and I think he's one that, could slip out of the first with how he's played this year. And keep in mind, too, he's dealt with some injuries. He's been banged up. This offense has not been great, like you touched on. McCord has just not been the guy. He's no CJ Stroud. Shocker. It takes a lot to replace that. He turns out he's a pretty good quarterback after all. But with that said, like Egbuka a good bit, and even if he's not drafted day one in the first round, I think he has the overall talent where it's justified, where you might be getting him at more of a value if he does end up going day two, because he has the talent to be there. Kind of like T. Higgins did a couple years back, where he was the first pick in the second round, was talked about as being a guy who could have easily been drafted in the first. This is a similar situation, in my opinion, different players, but similar situations and aspects of their game in terms of just where the valuations could be on him, where he could fall down your rookie draft board, just like you did the NFL draft board. But don't sleep on Egbuka. Great, talented player, good route runner, can play inside and outside, like you mentioned. Probably primarily going to feature in the slot, but he's not, handcuffed to it. He's not chained to it. He doesn't need to play in the slot to be good. He's done it both ways. He's working with about, on average this season, about a 77 to 22% split between the two, and then the other percent he's just kind of wherever, I guess, lined up in the backfield or something.
Yeah, sometimes, you can use them a whole bunch of different ways. Really versatile, and I think that's, teams are always looking for players that they can use in a multitude of different ways, and Egbuka really fits that. So,
especially if he gets in an inventive offense that can use a player with his, kind of Swiss Army knife skill set. There's a guy that could really pop off and do really well. It's great talent all around, and probably should be a first-round pick, but we just get to play off of what actually happens and not what we wish would happen.
Lots of good wide receivers in this draft class.
That's true, and it'd be pretty crazy if 6 of them go in the first, like a lot of people are projecting, but we will have to see what happens. And this is some projection here by me, and I'm going back to Oregon at this point. And I'm going to take Bo Nix here with my next pick. And
that's my next pick.
I think he's shown enough. One of the, red flags with quarterbacks for me is quarterbacks that, play an extra year or whatever. But you look at Bo Nix's time with Auburn, and that team and that organization is just anything but organized, which is, it's organization, kind of a pun there, I guess. But either which way, a rough time in Auburn, comes to Oregon, year one, immediate improvement. We always talked about when we, somebody made us watch Seth Williams' film at one point, and the one thing that always popped for me with Bo Nix was how he just could make such amazing plays and then go make a boneheaded play the next one. And it'd just be like, why can't you just do the good things? At Oregon, he's managed to just do the good things. He's been taught well. He's in this system. He's doing well.
You know who that's very similar to, Bob?
Tell me.
Brock Purdy.
Sure.
Do the same thing at Iowa State. He would make amazing plays, and then the most boneheaded plays you could imagine. Brock Purdy goes to the 49ers under Kyle Shanahan, a good system, an organized team.
Yeah, there you go.
And look what he's done. He's a great processor, and Bo Nix is the same. Bo Nix is a great processor. It has all the arm talent that you need.
Yeah, and I think, one of the things tuning into the broadcast last night, I was watching the Oregon State game, and one of the things they kept talking about was, and that I've seen on film and just any game you watch, but they were really hammering it home in this game, was the poise he has, always Joe Cool, or excited, because they just made a big play, but always could throw a bad ball, could do this, could do that, whatever the bad play was, it washed away, it was done. But the mindset he has of from when he started, because he's a veteran now in college landscapes, and I'm projecting that he'll take this to the next level. I think he has that poise, that confidence to that, hey, I'm going to pick this defense apart. But with all that said, I'm confident that Bo Nix can be a first-round pick in next year's draft. We see how quarterbacks are kind of being, still somehow undervalued. When teams need quarterbacks, they need these players that can not only run an offense, not only be a game manager, but can elevate an offense I think Bo Nix can do that. I'm happy taking him here at the 110. And honestly, if he gets drafted in the first round, this is a pipe dream. I think you're having to pick him a lot earlier. Possibly even after Drake May, depending on how things are shaking out. We'll see what happens. But Nate, why don't you go ahead? Feel free to touch on Bo Nix if you feel the need. We're diving to your 111.
Yeah, I mean, I've talked about Bo Nix quite a bit. He was my favorite sleeper for the first round coming into the season. I talked about it on this channel quite a bit in the offseason. And look at this. Look how it's worked out, Bob. One of the
Beautiful
Heisman front runners, being considered as a first round selection now. We're certainly a day 2 pick. I love what I've seen out of him in Oregon. Now, with this next pick, I'm going to select a running back. And I don't think you're going to have to select this guy at this point. But I want him, and it's Jonathan Brooks.
I love this pick. Love it.
Jonathan Brooks tore his ACL, unfortunately, just a couple weeks ago. So it's going to be a slow start to his rookie season, no matter what. Even if he is healthy enough to get in there week 1, it's not going to be a quick ramp up to production in fantasy. But in this running back class, there's so much unknown and so much, I want to say, middling talent, where we don't have anyone really taking the reins and challenging for that RB1 spot outside of Treyvon Henderson. I had Jonathan Brooks as my RB1 in this draft class until the injury. And with the injury, there's going to be a bit of a discount now. There's going to be a bit more patience that's going to be required for Jonathan Brooks. But I still do think that he is one of the best, if not the best, running back in this draft class. And what he did with Texas this year was really incredible. Seeing him really break out and continue that long-standing tradition of Texas running backs being great. Jonathan Brooks, I'm happy picking him here at the 11th spot. I don't think I will once we get to the offseason. There's other guys that are going to jump him who are healthy. But I want to, like you did, make sure I get that top running back in this draft class because it is scarce after this. So I'm going after Jonathan Brooks. Was one of the best running backs in college football this year, at the top of the leaderboards for missed tackles forced, for receiving yards, touchdowns, rushing yards, everything. He was super productive for Texas, one of the best players they got down there, and they have a lot of talent. So Jonathan Brooks, locking him in as my first round pick. Probably get to pick him up in the second round, but at this point, I want to make sure I get him, make sure I get to talk about him as one of the top talents. So Jonathan Brooks, number 11.
Yeah, I love this pick. He was on my queue, quote unquote, at the 12th pick. I think he's a guy that you're going to be able to pick up most of the time in the second round.
Yeah.
And I still think that it's possible that he gets day 2 draft capital. Yeah, I don't think it's a death sentence that he had an ACL tear, especially not early in the season, but like not at the tail end, not like when we're getting into bowl games and things like that. Just that little bit of space, that little bit of extra buffer. But you do need to note that there's going to be a ramp up or a slow ramp up because he's not going to be able to practice much, if at all, coming into the season. So he's going to be behind on all that cohesiveness. He's going to be a tough guy to probably put on the field early. And unless he's in just a devoid backfield, which is possible. We've seen it in the NFL before. But I love this pick. I love the talent, I think, and he was trending towards my running back 1 as well. With how he's played and how he's looked, and like you mentioned, all the elusiveness and all this and that. But it's a shame what happened, but we have to deal with it, and the NFL does as well. Somebody's going to get a bargain on Jonathan Brooks. I hope it's you, the viewer.
What we've seen with Breece Hall coming back from his ACL injury, Kyler Murray coming back, first game back from his ACL injury, he looked just about 100% scrambling around the field. So ACL isn't quite the death sentence it used to be. And even at this point, it's not even, quite as long of a ramp up period as it used to be with, especially with how athletic these guys are now. They're able to come back, rehab so well, they get the top talent, in the medical field helping them out. So I do expect Jonathan Brooks to, be on the field next year, not too long into the season. And, if he's producing by the midpoint, by the end of the season, going into his second year in the NFL, I think you're going to have one of the top running backs in the league.
Yeah, no, he could be an incredible value in drafts. Really and the only question I have when it comes to the surgery that's going to have to take place or has taken place, and the rehab that's going to have to take place is he going to get as good of treatment as he could have if he was in the NFL already? Because obviously, if you're in the NFL, you just have more access to and you obviously have the money to do these things too, or the whatever the support is you need to get these things done. That's my only like small question
Yeah,
comparing
but he's
the
at the
two of
University of
how.
Texas, so even if it is a tier down, it's just a tier down.
Yeah, you'd think that is my only hang up, but I still love the player, love the talent, love this pick.
And I
I
believe
don't
it
think
was
you have to pick.
just an ACL. I don't think there was additional damage, though it's
I think it
college
was
football,
clean as
so
well.
we don't really
True.
get all that information.
That's a good point. We will have to just stay tuned and find out. And speaking of staying tuned and finding out, I'm moving on my last pick for this first round, and I'm taking what I believe is the last really good wide receiver that I
All right.
don't have as many questions about compared to when we get into the rest of this class. It's questions aplenty. I'm going Keon Coleman here. Now, after a transfer, kind of having another or a breakout season, let's say, there are going to be questions when it comes to his separation. And I
Mhm.
think the one thing to note with him, and this is going to sound gross and icky because of how we talk about this player on this channel, it reminds me of a lot of how Keon Coleman's separation reminds me a lot of how Drake London separates, which it's very minimal, but he does enough to get away from whoever's defending him and catch the ball. Now, the reason we talk about Drake London the way we do on this channel is not because of the knock on talent, but because of the knock on the situation and how he's used in that offense. Keon Coleman, I kind of feel similarly about. I think he has a little more explosiveness as a runner with the ball in his hands than a Drake London does, which is fine. And I'm not necessarily comparing the two. I'm just kind of comparing that one element of their game to each other. But Keon Coleman, some of the best hands that I've seen in this class so far, and that's evidenced by his drops. And that's one way that we kind of look at metrics wise, has 3 drops over 150 targets. It's around 2.7% drop rate, which is the best I've seen out of any receiver going back, as far as I can remember, just looking through anybody I can. And we get into this, he's a big freakish guy who can't really separate that much. You get into that kind of scary boomer bust range, but I've seen
Mhm.
a lot of ball skills out of Keon Coleman. I liked a lot of what he did at Michigan State before the transfer. This has kind of been, in a lot of ways, he's made Johnny Wilson kind of the afterthought of the offense at times, where that was kind of our benchmark for Johnny Wilson would be, well, how's he going to be with a guy we really like in Keon Coleman? And Wilson is still at his games, his times where he's performed, but, a lot of the same issues that I had, especially with Johnny Wilson coming into the season. I know I was a little lower on him. By a little, I mean a lot lower than him on him than you were. But it is what it is. I'm taking Keon Coleman here because I think after this, there's some guys I like, but I have a lot more questions.
Yeah.
And especially just with how things are valued, how wide receivers are valued in the league. Keon Coleman is somebody who's being mocked in the top 15 of mock drafts, of NFL mock drafts. If that's the case, if he's getting drafted that high, just from a pure value sake, I like the pick here. Feel free to touch on that or dive into your first pick of the second round.
Yeah.
And if you are doing that, if you haven't commented on the video yet, what great player did us idiots leave out of the first round that you would have absolutely snatched up going into the 201? Tell us, leave it in the comments. But Nate, I want to hear who you got at the 201. Feel free to touch on Keon Coleman if you feel the need.
Yeah. I
Otherwise,
feel like there's a top 12 at this point, and Keon
Sure.
Coleman is the last player in that top 12.
Sure.
So the first round kind of plays out pretty nicely. I think we've actually had a pretty chalk first round. Our draft actually ended up being pretty much my cue. So
Me too.
there we go. But Keon Coleman, I do think that he is the riskiest of this top 6 at the wide receiver position or whatever,
1000%.
because he's the similar archetype to Drake London, who I don't believe is a bust, but also Quentin Johnston, Treylon Burks, kind of, these guys that, like you said, aren't able to separate as well and win on contested catches. Yeah, and he's been incredible in contested catches, and he's been able to take over games for Florida State this year and literally win them the game because of his ability to go up and catch the ball when Jordan Travis just threw it up there and hoping for the best. So, like, the talent and the production has been there, but once you get to the NFL, are you able to replicate that? Especially if you're a one-trick pony. And I kind of think Keon Coleman is a bit of a one-trick pony at this point. So I am lower on him than all the other wide receivers. He does kind of just make it into that tier, though, because of his production, because of his ability to take over the game. But we've talked about it a lot on this channel at different times, where this archetype of player is kind of getting phased out of the NFL, especially as a reliable target, consistently.
Yeah. If he can't, develop the part of his game that is more of a pure route runner, I definitely have concerns, especially if we don't see a little bit of that year one. I could see him being a guy who fizzles out for me really quickly, and a guy that you want to move like early if, it starts trending that way. But again, if he gets that early draft capital, like we kind of think he is, like
Yeah.
most data sources are suggesting, where he's going to be a first round pick, with how the shift in value is with wide receivers we've touched on, draft the highest value, when, as per rule, if you're in a draft, either draft best player available to you or best value available. Who's the most valuable player on the board at this point? For me, it was Keon Coleman.
Yep.
So,
and I actually picked up a ton of Keon Coleman this offseason when he transferred from Michigan State to Florida State. Thought it was a great opportunity. I saw the path to production for Florida State. It was a team that was set up for a big run this year, and they have done that. And Keon Coleman, speaking of the Drake London connection, he does have the basketball experience as well, just like Drake London. He's got like 10 minutes of NCAA basketball play in there. So, we can officially count him as a two-sport athlete.
There you go.
But I picked up a bunch of Keon Coleman this offseason, and I'm probably going to be flipping him a lot between now and the draft, or around the draft, because I do think he's a first-round guy as well. So someone I'm probably going to be moving off a lot of. And to be honest, we'll probably just not have a lot of shares of, just because of where his value is going to be in first rounds.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that one bit. And like I said, if you haven't commented yet, who are you running to the draft board to grab at the 201 that we missed? Let us know in the comments for sure. Nate, I want to hear who you're running to the draft board to go get at 201, because I think, and that's a full pun intended, because I think running back value is going to be great in round 2 this year, because I think there's enough guys, or there's going to be good other talent coming down, because somebody's got to make this draft good. Something's got to give with this draft. Either we're going to get running back value in the second, or we're going to get other values in the second round. I want to know what it's going to be for you. What are you after here in this second round?
Yeah, there's a player that I actually have ranked over the player I'm going to take, but you gotta know your league a little bit, Bob. And I think I got to know you a little bit with who you're going to select. So I'm going to go ahead and take Braylon Allen. Talking about the running backs, hasn't had the most incredible season this year, just from a Wisconsin standpoint, especially recently. With this video coming out, the last couple games, Wisconsin's not been good. And Braylon Allen in turn has not been good either. I believe in the last couple of games, he's had a game where he had like 2 yards average. He did have 2 touchdowns though against Nebraska, so it kind of made up for it. But been struggling as an offense as a whole. But before that, he had a really strong start to the season. You take a step back and you look at his season as a whole, he's still on pace as he has been the last couple of years. 5.3 yards per carry. He had 5.4 last year. So really, he hasn't really lost too much from last year. Wisconsin has a new head coach this year, first year in that new offense. So a little bit of a change. He actually has 25 receptions, which is a career high this year. And now, to be honest, a lot of those are checkdowns and screens. But I love that they've just been able to use him in that way. I love seeing an NCAA coach using a running back in the receiving game, even if it is on screens, because we talked about it earlier with Rome Odunze. I want to see players that coaches are trying to get the ball in their hands, because those are the guys that are making a difference. And Braylon Allen can absolutely make that difference. He's athletic. He's big. He's got the great size here, 6'2", 245. He's powerful. He's got good burst. One of the better running backs in this draft class, a little limited though, and that's why he falls into the second round, I think, for both of us, is because of his limitations in the receiving game. He can do it, but he's not going to be that receiving threat that is going to get manufactured touches in the receiving game in the NFL. And that is so valuable at this point for running backs, because of the landscape where it's not a lot of depth production-wise, that if you can find a guy that can rely on targets and receptions, you can really do really well with that right now with the running back position. And Braylon Allen is going to be a bit more touchdown dependent. He's going to have to go into a good situation where they can feed him the ball, where he can, kind of have that little bit of Derrick Henry effect, where he, kind of gets better as the game goes on. And when he gets to the third quarter, fourth quarter, that's when he's really starting to wear down the defense and he gets that touchdown. So I still like the potential with Braylon Allen, but because he's a little bit more limited, falls into the second round for me.
Yeah, I think he's one that you'll have to watch a lot of film, because not a lot will pop when it comes to just statistics at this point, because he has had such a down year. And that is, again, being a product of the offense, because Wisconsin has been absolutely dog water. He's also had significantly less attempts this season, which is probably due to the offense not being on field as much, down to 155 attempts compared to last season having 230. We have another game coming, but still not even close to touching what he did last year. And being a little banged up at 1.2 did that to him as well, missing most of a game or a good part of a game. But you look at the one thing I like to look at with Braylon Allen, with being his size, the one thing that has bumped up for him despite everything going on, yards after contact per attempt.
Yep.
And looking at last year, it was just under 3. Now it's up to 3.66, which is just a nice metric to show that he's still out there. He's still a tough player. He's still, bowling through tacklers and things like that. Elusiveness rating is up as well when you look at PFF. All of these things are good. And you nailed it with the receiving stuff. He is limited because he's not a guy who's going to run a route downfield. That is not going to be his game. He's going to be a guy who runs a little check down either out or just right in front of the quarterback and he sits down. It drove me nuts watching games this season where they just literally run him straight out from where the quarterback snaps the ball in a shotgun formation. And he just, all right, throw it to me. And I'm like, I pulled stats about halfway through their season, probably back around college, week 6 or 7, when we talked about him previously. And he was 35th out of 35th eligible running backs with X amount of targets in terms of average depth of target. All of his average depth of target is like -3 yards behind the line of scrimmage. Terrible if you're trying to be a receiving running back. He can catch the ball. He's a decent enough catcher of the ball. Just doesn't really do a lot with it. This offense isn't helping him do a lot with it. Like you said, that leads to the whole, he's not going to get these fancy manufactured touches. He's going to be a check down expert at best. He's a fine blocker. He'll take a, storming linebacker from the second level, going full sprint at him, no problem. But, when it comes to just receiving the ball, not his game.
0.64 yards per route run, Bob.
Yeah.
That's tied 154th in NCAA.
It's rough out here for Braylon Allen's receiving repertoire when it comes to actually producing with the receiving work given. But that is where I was going because I do think he's still a good running back. I think would be a good pairing with a better receiving back who can do a little bit of both. But Braylon Allen for me just, falling down because, and I think you could end up getting him at a value if he ends up in a good spot. I know that's cliche and kind of hyperbole at this point, but I still think you're getting a good running back. How good he ends up being in the NFL. And this could be a guy that goes back for another year. A lot of the things that we haven't talked about much yet is a lot of the players that we're talking about are juniors that can go back that maybe didn't have good seasons that, and God forbid, if Braylon Allen goes back, please transfer. Just go somewhere else.
Please.
Because, it's one of those things, if you love something, set it free. Because Braylon Allen needs to be on a better team because getting him in more of a national spotlight will shoot him up draft boards, which is bad for me in getting any shares, but it's great for him in, getting into a more possibly secure role where he could be more featured and really highlighted in an offense. But Braylon Allen falls here, and I'm left at a tough spot because, like I said, it gets icky here. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to go and not triple up with a school, but I'm going to go with Blake Corum here with my next pick. And this is a guy who I've had concerns with just in terms of just something not hitting right on the film. But when you look at him, and I think he's lost a little bit over the course of last year, I think that knee injury has kind of plagued him into the season a little bit. Just with you, when you look at the biggest evidence of this for me is looking at yards after contact per attempt is down almost a full yard compared to the last 2 seasons, 3.84 yards after contact per attempt in 2021, and in 2022 it was already down to 3.35. This year it's all the way down to 2.57, and the elusiveness rating has absolutely tanked for Blake Corum here, going from 132 in 2021 down to 97 in 2022 and 26 in 2023. Now, I'm doing a lot of crap talking for a player that I'm drafting here at the 202, but what can't be denied is how his production has still stayed to a relative point of degree at this point, especially looking at touchdowns. And that's something people always talk about is when you have touchdowns, that's what translates to the NFL at the next level. You're getting the ball in, either red zone carries or whatever the case is. You're getting the ball in situations that really matter for the team. Like we've also kind of touched on 18 touchdowns last year, 11 in 2021, 20 this season already, and still a handful of games to go. Michigan's going to be busy with games over the next month and a half or so. I don't think they're going anywhere anytime super soon. Don't forget, he does have some pass catching chops. It's definitely not a huge part of his game. Another guy who I think is going to be part of a committee. And I think, everybody said, well, I don't want a committee back. That's all there is right now. There's not a lot of backs out there that can be anything else. He's a very compact runner. He's a very shifty runner. I am thinking that there's a possibility that he kind of bounces back long-term over this injury. Sometimes injuries, just the mental aspect of an injury, the physical aspect of an injury take, different timelines to get back from. He's still been productive. He hasn't been, super inefficient by any stretch of the imagination. But at this point, I won't say I'm happy taking him here, because I think this is a point of like, man, it's hard not to take him, because I think he's a day 2 pick with his production. It's hard to imagine him not being a day 2 pick. Whether or not that transpires into anything super crazy, we'll see. We'll have to wait to get to that point. But Nate, feel free to touch on Blake Corm or dive into your next pick. Just don't snipe me. That's the only
I don't think I'm going to snipe you. Don't worry. I don't think the player that I'm about to pick is on your radar.
I hope not.
And it's a 5th-year breakout. So there's going to be a lot of question marks about this guy.
Definitely not. Definitely not.
So 5th-year breakout. I'm picking him here at the 203. What? Xavier Legette out of South Carolina. And yeah, this might be the next Jonathan Mingo. Might be the next player like that. 6'3", 227, plays for South Carolina. Literally did nothing his entire 4 years. And then this year with South Carolina has just absolutely dominated. 65 receptions as of recording, 1,187 yards, 7 touchdowns, averaging 18.3 yards per catch, and also being used a little bit on the ground, trying to get him some touches. But watching film of Xavier Legette, he's got some of the best hands, I think, in this class. Really, really strong hands. I talked about the size, 6'3", 227. He's a big guy. He's very physical. He is able to create some separation. He has a varied route tree. He's able to go up and get the ball, time the ball well, win those contested catch situations. He's a guy that just has developed into an all-around receiver. And I do have a lot of question marks because it's a 5th-year breakout. Maybe he's just really good because he's 3 years older than all the other players he's playing. I can't worry about the production because the production's there. And from what I've heard, NFL scouts like him as well. He's being looked at as a day 2 draft pick. This isn't a guy that's, somewhere sitting there like in the 5th round come spring. This is a guy that they're expecting to be picked up in the 2nd round. And like I said, we've seen some 2nd round wide receivers not work out in the same kind of mold. I think what it separates Xavier Legette is that he's able to not just create yards after the catch. Like, he's got a little bit of that Jonathan Mingo, AJ Brown, giving you both sides of that range, ability to be physical after the catch. He's got great speed for his size. He's able to really pull away from linebackers, corners, safeties, all of them. He can pull away and have some really big plays. Like, he can take a slant to the house. And there's not too many 6'3", 6'4" players that can do that. So I really like what I've seen with him, with his ability. Tied 4th in the nation with 13 deep catches. A talent, a question mark, but there's a lot of question marks here in the 2nd round, Bob. And I'm excited about Xavier Legette right now. I don't know how excited I'll be about him later, because I think there's a lot of wide receivers in this tier that can move around a bunch. But right this second, I like what Xavier Legette's done. He's on fire right now. If he can keep it up, I think he's definitely a day 2 pick and probably a 2nd rounder. So someone worth looking at in our 2nd rounds.
Yeah, I don't know if there's anyone with more upside at this point in drafts. Outside of, there's probably running backs, but obviously that's more just because of the volatility and just pop of the running back position in the general consensus. But I have questions with Xavier Legette, and it's always the 1 year of production, 1 year of breakout production in the 5th year. And when I first look at it, I'm like, okay, well, was he injured? What changed? What happened that could have led to this breakout? And that's always the question you should ask, is what changed? And so first thing I looked at, okay, was he injured? Was he just, a walking IR every season? But no, played plenty in games, played across the season, missed games here and there, but nothing significant by any stretch. Didn't like miss a whole season because of an ACL or anything. And then I looked, okay, maybe the coaching changed. And Coach has been there since 2021, so it's not a new coach really. And then the last thing I checked that I probably had to check, I think, is that what's the offensive coordinator situation? Offensive coordinator was hired at the end of last season after the season had been after finished. So we have a new offensive coordinator. All of a sudden, Xavier Legette is a thing. That could be a line to draw that, hey, maybe this offense is just catered to him. And if you look at the rest of their receiver core, not great, which, you think about it over the course of time, we haven't talked about any South Carolina wide receivers in the last 4 years that are coming out that would have kept Legette off the field or out of the focus of the lens of the offense.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just very suspect to me that when, we have this new OC comes in, apparently likes Legette. I'm not saying that anything you said about his talent isn't true, because I think he's incredibly quick off the line, has good hands, it makes some incredible catches, has ball skills, but it is extremely concerning that now it's finally happening. And whenever that, bell goes off in my head, I struggle with it. I don't hate the pick here. I think in the second round, it's kind of pick your poison. And, when it comes to upside, he has the size, he has the athleticism. It looks like he has some ball skills. Just a glaring red flag of how long it took him to do these things.
Yep.
And until then, we'll see what happens. We have a whole draft process to get through. If he's a day 2 pick, depending on how things shake out, might not hate him here, but I'm glad you just didn't take my guy. With that said, I'm going to triple up on the Oregon Ducks offense at this point, and I'm going to go ahead and take the running back in the Oregon Ducks offense. I'm going to go after Bucky Irving here, and just a guy who I don't think I'm probably on an island with Bucky Irving at this point, because I haven't heard much about his NFL prospects, NFL draft situation, or anything like that. But when I watch Bucky Irving play, this guy, super shifty, has all the lateral quickness in the world. He's a compact runner, not small by any stretch, but not like a massive guy, tough runner. And the biggest thing for me is he finds space when there isn't any. He finds a way to work through and navigate through traffic. And when you look at good running backs in the NFL, that's one of the benchmarks, is that they're able to just navigate traffic and, have that vision. And then to pile it on with the lateral quickness that he has to weave his way through all that traffic is huge. Also, consistent production the last 2 seasons in both 2022 and 2023. You can also catch the ball, and that's, huge with running backs, because that makes him a little less pigeonholed into what role he could be in. He could be in a, primary role in an offense. He could be a supporting role. It doesn't have to be either here nor there. I think Bucky Irving is probably one who, probably isn't a day 2 pick at this point. But I think running backs, you just got to go with talent, because they're not getting respected in the drafts. They're not getting respected in the free agency process. As a guy I really like here, and a guy I'm taking moving on. And like I said, he hasn't been talked about enough, in my opinion, even though he's been on, a quote unquote national scale playing with Oregon over the last 2 seasons. Very competitive team, ranked highly in NCAA standards. Hope he gets talked about a little more. I hope he pops off enough in the pre-draft process to get people excited to draft him in the NFL. We'll see what happens. But Nate, feel free to talk about Bucky Irving or make your next pick here.
I think Bucky Irving's a fine running back, but I think
hate him.
There's just a really large tier of running backs, and I think it is kind of a pick or
Sure.
poison thing. I think they're all kind of similar talent, and it's gonna come down to draft capital and opportunity for a lot of these running backs, because I think, if Bucky Irving goes somewhere where there's a great situation, I'll be all about him. But if he goes somewhere where there's not, I think there's enough talent in this running back class in that mid tier where I'll just go chase a better situation, because I think there's a lot of similar talent in this pool.
Sure.
So with that being said, I'm not going to go to the running back position. I'm avoiding running back really in this draft outside of Braylon Allen, I guess, and Jonathan Brooks. So I've already got my 2 guys. So I'm going to keep going to the wide receiver pool. And I'm going after Adonai Mitchell for Texas. And might turn some heads because I'm picking him before his teammate Xavier Worthy. But I'm concerned about Xavier Worthy's drops. I'm sure we'll get to that here soon. But Adonai Mitchell, former transfer from Georgia, transferred to Texas last year. Had a decent little year with Texas last year, but has really broken out this year. Has 9 touchdowns so far in the season. Has been a threat in the red zone. I believe has been one of the best wide receivers in the red zone so far this year. He's also versatile. I mean, play inside, play outside. He's got good route running ability. He can play, the 3 levels of the field pretty well. I like what he brings to the table because he's athletic. He's a bigger wide receiver, 6'4", 196 pounds. So, I love that size. Like I said, coming into this video, we have wide receivers with size who are able to create separation, who are able to, have those contested catch ability, but also have that versatility that we haven't been able to see before. And Adonai Mitchell fits that. So I like what I've seen with him. He's been really good here recently for Texas. I do think he has jumped Xavier Worthy a little bit, who I think is a bit more one-dimensional, as much as I think he is really good with his athletic ability and ability to get down the field sometimes. Adonai Mitchell just seems a bit more versatile, a bit more of what the NFL is probably looking for. And here in the second round, it is pick your poison. We could put, this whole second round, a couple weeks from now, we could flip it and we could have all these guys in totally different spots, but still in the second round. And I think that's more than fair because at this point, until we get the draft capital, until we get to the all-star games and start seeing these guys really start to pull away from each other and we get to see them on the same field, there's just a lot of talent that's all very similar. It's pick your poison. I like Adonai Mitchell.
You take your wide receivers. I'm going to keep piling up running backs over
All
here,
right.
and I'm going to go grab one of our favorite sleepers heading into the season. I'm going to go ahead and snag Devin Neal here. And
that was my next pick. I was hoping I could stick him.
You should have taken him. You should have taken him first. So I'm taking Devin Neal here. Another guy, you look at the player, you look at the consistent production that he's put up over the past couple seasons. He does have receiving chops. It's not his best, format. He reminds me a lot of a Kendre Miller, and that's probably why I like him a lot, is because he has that kind of slashing. But I honestly think he's a better Kendre Miller, if I'm being totally honest.
I hope so at this point.
Easy. He's playing behind Alvin Kamara. Chill. Okay. And he's been banged up for what it's worth. But I digress. The thing that pops for me watching Devin Neal, similar to a Bucky Irving, is so slippery, so smooth, so elusive, and just finds ways to get through, traffic over time, and has had that production, like I said, the touchdown production so far and so forth. My one concern with Devin Neal, and this shouldn't be a knock on him, but I'm concerned that too much of his production comes off of what I believe to be kind of a gimmicky offense. They run a lot of wildcat. They run a lot of the, option plays, so on and whatnot. I still love the player. I think he's, fast enough, has great burst, elusive, super elusive, and hard to, get your hands on to tackle. I don't think he's a strong bowling runner by any stretch of the imagination, but you're going to have a tough time putting your hands on him, especially if he gets going even a little bit. So Nate, feel free to add on to Devin Neal if you feel a need, or dive into your next pick here.
Yeah, with my next, I love Devin Neal. I've been on Devin Neal for a while. I think his lateral ability and his patience behind the line is really impressive, and reminds me of another Kansas running back I once watched, Puka Williams, with great patience behind the line of scrimmage and great burst into the second level. So I like Devin Neal quite a bit. That's a great pick there, I think. But Bob, I'm not going to the running back position until I get these guys who are day 2 draft capital. I think we have a bunch of talent that might end up 4th, 5th round, which I don't think is the death sentence it used to be for running backs. But I think just with the position on how it's valued these days, it's going to be hard to see a lot of day 2 guys in this draft class until we actually see it. So going back to a different position, going back to the tight end position now, Bob.
Good pick.
I'm picking Jatavion Sanders out of Texas, and another Texas player. Athletic, has really been a key component for their offense this year. 6'4", 243 pounds, has 457 yards on the season so far. But what makes him special is the 16.3 yards per catch. His athletic ability to create yards after the catch, to win contested catches down the field, to rip it open down the seam. That's what NFL teams love to see. He's going to be able to have that versatility to be on plays where he can block. He's not a bad blocker. He can be an all-around tight end, but put him out in the slot, let him get down the field a little bit, and he can be that athletic tight end that can create plays for you. And I feel good picking up a tight end like that in the middle of the second round. This is a great time to take a swing on a tight end who I think has a lot of talent, has been productive with Texas, and I'll take the really high percentile. He doesn't have a single drop this year so far, Bob. So I like the strong hands. I like his ability. He's got 1.81 yards per route run, which is pretty darn good for a tight end in college. My solid tight end too in this draft class. Happy to pick him up in the second round. I'm not targeting any other tight ends in this draft, this 2-round draft, just so you know. So I'm happy to pick up the top 2 tight ends in this draft class.
Yeah, I think this is a great pick. I like Xavier Sanders as much as the next guy. I think he's one of those complete tight ends. Big, athletic, can quote unquote do it all, even though he's had somewhat quote unquote limited production. And he plays a lot in line, which leads me to believe that there's not going to be as much of a shift when he goes to the next level, because we always, so much of tight end development is being able to actually operate as a tight end and not just as a wide receiver like they do sometimes in college. So with that said, love the pick here, love where your head's at. I'm going to go ahead and go to the quarterback position because I think we need to get some more quarterbacks on this board in a super flex draft. And, this is still with the assumption that probably the rest of the guys that we're talking about are day 2 picks. And I think there's possibility they're a first round pick. I'm not willing to put that label on them myself yet because of the question marks I do have with their production so far. But I'm going to go ahead and take what I believe is the next highest upside quarterback that's still on the board. I'm going to go Jaden Daniels here out of LSU.
Okay.
A guy who immediate red flag for me is needing more than 4 years of college football. Always a red flag. But in his 5th year, finally coming around. And I honestly, he's had decent production over his first few seasons outside of the 2020 year. First year, 2,900 yards. After 2020 and 2021, 2,300, 2,900 yards again, sitting at 30.
There's a reason he transferred from that Arizona State program, which ended up becoming one of the worst programs over the last 2 years.
Exactly. So he ended up transfers to a better situation. Didn't really get going with LSU yet till the end of the season. But man, he's kicked it on here. And, that's always kind of a bit of a red flag too, is, it needed, that much more time to figure it out, and then needed more time to figure it out in a new situation. I get it though. I'm not crucifying the guy, just saying that it's one of those red flags for me. But you look at a season so far, 36 touchdowns, 4 interceptions, boatload of yards. Like I mentioned, 3,500 yards. Completion rating is up and through the roof. The yards per attempt is way up. The career best before was 8.7 yards per attempt. Now it's up to 11.6. Just playing really good ball. And then not even to touch on how he is as a quarterback. He's an elite level threat as a runner with the ball. And this is not like, super gimmicky stuff. This is, quarterback draws. This is scrambles. He's able to move the ball with his legs as much as he is with his arm. 1,000 yards rushing the last 2 seasons, over 10 touchdowns rushing the last 2 seasons. Does have some fumbles, but that's kind of to be expected when you're a quarterback running with the ball. Sometimes you're going to get lit up and drop the ball is to be expected. But I think grabbing him here in the second round, if he's a day 2 pick, he should be absolutely drafted in the second round of your rookie drafts, especially if he's in a decent enough situation like a Will Levis. I'm not going to vault him up boards because, he's a Will Levis, you get what I'm saying in that situation. But a guy in your second round, if he's a day 2 pick, obviously if he's a day 1 pick, much different conversation we're having. We're talking about him up in that, top 5, top 6, 7 range, probably. Like the pick here, like the upside, especially at the quarterback position with looking at what's left on the board. That's where I'm at, Nate. I want to hear where you're at. What do you got with your next pick?
I'm going to go to a running back. One of my favorite sleeper running backs coming into the season, and that was Marshawn Lloyd for USC.
Ooh, nice pick.
Yeah. I love Marshawn Lloyd. I really liked him when he was at South Carolina, but just could never be healthy. Could never stay healthy, and that South Carolina offense was not consistent at all with Spencer Rattler leading the helm. So he transfers to USC. Love a guy who transfers up. Transferring to USC is definitely a transfer up from the other USC, University of South Carolina. So goes to USC, and to start the season, he was one of the best running backs in college football to start the season. He's kind of fizzled out over the past couple of weeks, but the USC offense as a whole really has. But still averaging 7.1 yards per catch. Still has 232 yards receiving, only 13 catches so far this year. He's explosive. He's got great lateral ability. He's had a lot of injuries in his college career, but he's still explosive, still has that agility to make people miss, get into the second level. And watching Marshawn Lloyd, I'm always looking for running backs that get me excited, to be quite honest, because the running back pool is so close, tight-knit with talent. There's a lot of good running backs in college football right now. There's a lot of good running backs in the NFL right now. That is why they are so replaceable, and the NFL values them so little, because they are replaceable. Marshawn Lloyd, he fits into that mold of a guy that I would feel comfortable handing the ball to in an NFL game. I don't think he's going to be a day 2 pick. I think this Marshawn Lloyd is probably more of a 4th rounder, a 5th rounder, but we've seen those guys now get opportunity. Those guys are being drafted in the 4th, 5th round with the intention of being a top 2, maybe 3 running back on a depth chart. Teams aren't reaching for a running back on day 2 they know they can get a good talent in day 3, and that's Marshawn Lloyd right now. So 48 missed tackles, 4 so far this year, 9 touchdowns. He's been one of the more consistent players for that USC offense. Unfortunately, as of recording the last 2 games, he only has about 54 rushing yards over that time. But last game against UCLA, he did have 3 receptions for 75 yards. Like I said, he does have that explosiveness. You get him in the open field, he's going to make people miss. He's going to get down the field. That's what we're looking for here with these running backs. So Marshawn Lloyd, a guy who's improved every single year. I want to see what he can do in the NFL. I think he's going to be a guy that's going to be given a chance.
A player that I'm begrudgingly drafting because I've, kind of been, again, anti-older quarterbacks in draft processes before. I'm going to go ahead and take Michael Penix Jr. here. And this is, probably the poster child of quarterbacks who have been in college, quote unquote, too long, but needed to be there this long to, get any sort of draft capital, because you look at the first 4 years of his college career, between injuries, whatever the case is, just not performing well, not good, would never have been drafted respectively. Now, at least he's in first round discussions. Still think he's more of a day 2 pick, which is good. This could land him on a team that, can sit him, develop him, doesn't necessarily need him right away, but has now a really good backup quarterback, and that could replace, down the road to be, their starting quarterback of the future. I think that's totally possible. Kind of in that same vein of a Sam Howell-esque situation. Obviously, Sam Howell was a 5th round pick, not necessarily pegging Penix Jr. for that much of a fall, but something along those lines. You look at his production this year, he's been great. Even last year, he's been great in this Washington offense, putting Rome Odunze on the map. Not that that's necessarily just a Penix Jr. thing, but I'll take Michael Penix Jr. Again, another guy that I think I'm projecting a day 2 pick on at this point. I could change my tune on that with how things shake out, but with the age, he's right on the cusp of when you get to a certain age when you're drafted, it's just not good. Like, just because of you've gone through most of your development already, there's not a lot more you can do. He's a great college quarterback so far. If you would have been doing this 2 years ago, or, starting to do this 2 years ago instead of just over the last 2 years, definitely a different conversation to be had. But with that said, putting this one in the books, you have one more pick. I have one more pick. You are taking a guy that probably would have been going at the 111 at the start of the season, but how the mighty have fallen, and I guess he's still worthy of being drafted in at least the 2nd round. What do you got here, Nate?
Yeah, Xavier Worthy for Texas. I drafted a Texas wide receiver, and after his freshman year, we had Xavier Worthy pegged as the wide receiver 1 or 2 in this draft class, right up there with Marvin Harrison Jr. His freshman year at Texas, 62 receptions, 981 yards for 15.8 yards per reception, and 12 touchdowns, Bob. I mean, this truly an incredible freshman season. And then last year, he did have a wrist injury, which we point to all the time, but the drops started to really come into play. And the inconsistency with he wasn't able to make those plays down the field, and he was being used a lot in the screen game, and it was starting to become a bit limited, not as versatile as he was showing his freshman year. And this year, we kind of see the same thing. He's been very inconsistent. Some games he's out there and he's looking like one of the better wide receivers in college football on the team, and then some other games he's nowhere to be seen, and he's dropping the ball. He does have 5 drops this year, 7.4% rate, which is not good. I don't want to call him MVS, but he looks like MVS sometimes out there running down the field and dropping the ball, and no one wants to draft that. 27.8% contested catch rate this year. That's really down.
Rough.
And we're not talking about a small player. He's really fast, but he's 6'1", 172 pounds. He has that Slim Reaper build, but he does not have that contested catch ability that Devonta Smith has or Jordan Addison has. He's missing that aspect of the game. If he had that, he would be a 1st rounder. But the fact that right now, we have a guy who 21 screen catches, that's tied 33 in the league. So he's being used a lot on screen. And we can see that because, like I said, 15.8 yards his freshman year, 13.2 yards per reception this year, obviously a bit farther down, being used close to the line of scrimmage. He hasn't turned into that deep threat that we really were hoping he was going to be. Now he's a guy that you're manufacturing touches for, and you're hoping he breaks some tackles and makes a big play. And he has that ability. He certainly does. He's very talented. One of the quicker guys going to be in this draft class. I'm sure he's going to blow up the combine. The inconsistency is a big question mark for me. That's why he's not getting picked here until the end of the 2nd round. But he's also getting picked here at the end of the second round because of the upside, because of that speed, because of what we saw his true freshman year, because of what he can put together if he puts it together. We have a player that could be anything from, that Devonta Smith, Jordan Addison role to, is he the next Jalen Hyatt? Is he Will Fuller maybe? How limited is he going to be at the next level? I think at this point, pretty limited until he proves me wrong. So picking him here at the 211, but kind of excited about it because of the upside that Xavier Worthy brings to the table.
I'm struggling here with the last pick because there's a couple names that we like, but we have very strong feelings that they're probably going to go back to school.
Yep.
We'll talk about that in a minute. I think I'm going to go with a running back who I have some concerns with, but I do like the essence of, and I think he could be a cheaper Braylon Allen-esque type runner. I'm going to go ahead and take Audric Estime here out of Notre Dame.
Okay.
And a player who I like, who is, that typical kind of bowling ball build, bigger build, built for that type of running, built for hard running. I do have some concerns, at this point in drafts, you're going to have concerns about just about anybody, but, has, some receiving upside. I wouldn't call that a part of his game, similar to Braylon Allen. Again, it's there, he can do it, but it's not ever going to be a calling card for a guy like Audric Estime, but very powerful runner, as I mentioned. But the thing that really just concerns me with Estime is struggling against good teams. He pads his stat sheet. If you were to look at him, has 1,000-yard season, but he's playing teams like Central Michigan. And no offense to Central Michigan, I'm not taking shots here, but just not playing the best competition. And then he goes and plays other teams that are just significantly better, has okay games, usually due to 1 or 2 long runs. And then it's a lot of like 2-4 yard gains or a loss. And my concern for this is when you see this is when you get to the NFL, it's a lot of like playing against the very good teams in college, because that's where NFL players usually are coming from. And so I do question if he has enough of the burst, talent, etc., to get past those initial hits where he's, taking hits behind the line or very quickly after he reaches the line of scrimmage. But I do believe there's enough talent here to take a shot, especially in the second round, on a good running back. There are some wide receivers I like here too, like a Brian Thomas Jr. I'm also was on the chopping block here for me. But I think, with taking shots on running backs here, you don't get to do that a lot in the second round. And that's why I'm kind of, have had this emphasis throughout this video on that. Because I think there's going to be capable running backs with talent at this point in drafts.
Agreed.
So I think if that's the case, like I said, something's got to give. Either running back value is going to fall down the board, or running backs are going to rise up the board and push other value down the board. There's still going to be talent in this draft class. There's definitely concerns with what the level of talent that ends up being at the next level. But there's going to be talent in the draft. There's going to be ways to build your fantasy lineups. There's not going to be just, it's not going to be a bust of a class like people are. When you look at it with outside lenses, you're probably going to be a little like, ugh. But you get into it. Yeah, maybe it's not the dream class that everybody wants 2 years down the road. The 2026 class probably won't be any better than as it is today, so on and so forth. You get it. But Nate, feel free to touch on Audric Estime. I know you're a fan as well. Or feel free, we can get into the discussion of why we passed on some guys that are probably more popular names. Would you like to touch on Estime at all?
I don't need to touch on Estime too much. I think you pretty much hit the nail on the head. I think he's a little limited as a running back, but he does what he does well. And I think this is the year of the second round running back. And I mean that in our rookie draft. So there's going to be a lot of running backs in the second round. For a long time, that's where we've been to pick up a lot of wide receiver talent. But I think there's so much wide receiver talent at the top this year that people are going to be spending their first round picks on wide receivers, on quarterbacks. And then in the second round, going to have a lot of, pick your poison. Which running back do you want that has about the same draft capital, but just different situations, different talent level? Really interesting to see how the second round falls once we get closer to the draft. I think there is a lot of upside with a lot of these players with their talent, but also depending on draft capital and if the running back position does end up having a lot of running backs in day 3, I think it will be very much a pick your poison situation.
And I think now to get into it with some players we didn't draft that a lot of people are probably wondering why, because they're pretty high on people's draft boards because they're expecting them to come out or not. 2 names that really come to mind for me are JJ McCarthy and Raheem Rocket Sanders. And for Sanders, it's one of those cases of he's only a junior, only a 30-year player, has another year to burn as a running back. Probably not the worst thing in the world, especially with a crowded free agency class. a mixed bag of a running back class that you can kind of easily get lost in, and then dealing with injuries all season just has not been a good season for him leading into things. I think it's pretty easy that he makes the decision to go back and go in with next year's class. It's always going to be a better next year's class, but he'll have to face competition there for sure. But
yeah, this good running back class next year.
Feel free to touch on that or dive into JJ McCarthy. I know you had points on him too of, why you didn't take him in this draft class because so on. Go ahead.
Yeah. So Rocket, Raheem Sanders, I was a huge fan of him coming to the year. We talked about him as a possible candidate for the RB1 spot in this draft class. He did gain 10, 12 pounds in the offseason. And when that happened, the injuries started. He does not look like the same player. I mean, this guy looks like he runs at least 0.3 seconds slower on a 40-yard dash. The burst has really disappeared this year. The injuries definitely play a part of that, but I think the size does as well. He needs to take this offseason, lose those 10 pounds he gained. He was already plenty big enough at 230 pounds with a 6'1" frame. He already had that great combo of size and speed and power. He's now gone too much to the power side, doesn't really have the speed anymore. So hopefully he can get back to that level because I think he could definitely challenge to be one of the top running backs in next year's class, as good as that class is. Because when Raheem Rocket Sanders is on point, he is one of the best running backs in college football. So hopefully he can get back to that level. JJ McCarthy, his performances have not been great this year. They haven't played a very strong schedule, so he has really been able to put any good tape on film against high-level competition. He's going to have a chance today. In about 57 minutes, he's going to start playing Ohio State. So he's going to have the opportunity there to put something up. And then I think the Michigan team will, probably have some more games, to show that off. But McCarthy being a third-year guy, there's not a big prospect behind him that's, pushing for time, that's being developed at this point. So I think he comes back, plays another year. Michigan's got a really good team. They're trying for a championship. If he does come out, I think there's definitely some potential there. I think he's a good quarterback. He's rather pro-ready, but I think he's a little limited as well. I do want to see him go back for another year. Other guys that I'm assuming at this point are going back for another year, Shedeur Sanders out of Colorado. He's got too much going on with that Colorado team. They're on the up and up. Dion, his dad's the head coach. He's going to be there for at least another year to prove what he can do at the D1 level for another year. Carson Beck, another guy who's technically eligible, but I think he's going to come back for another year and has been able to show some talent over there for Georgia. They haven't really skipped a beat since missing Stetson Bennett, which is pretty impressive for Carson Beck as his first year as a starter. Now, the one that I don't know about, and we talked about this before the show, Bob, is Quinn Ewers. Because I think Quinn Ewers is an NFL talent. I don't really believe in him as a first-round talent at this point, but he's already transferred, and he's not graduating this year. So he can't transfer again unless he graduates, and then you have your grad transfer. But if he can't graduate, he's going to stay at Texas, which Arch Manning is right behind him and knocking on the door, or he goes in the NFL, and he's probably a day 2 pick at this point. So, a lot of question marks with Quinn Ewers and what's going to be happening with him over the next month or two, and that's going to be a great storyline to follow. So, those guys I think are going back. I don't think there's a ton of wide receivers that are going back. I think many wide receivers have had good years, but I do think, with the running back position, Donovan Edwards, I think, should go back after the season that he's had. He did say earlier in the season that he was going to go to the NFL draft after this year, but he has really not, put much production on the board. Blake Corm's really been the guy there. Even guys like Will Shipley that we've talked about in the past, he's done well, but he's not bona fide running back stud in the NFL draft. And probably might as well play a 4th year at Clemson and be the guy there and go into the draft next year and see if he can raise his stock. So some of those guys, we'll see how this all plays out. There's always a couple surprises either way, and that's always going to change the board. So.
Yeah, no, for sure. And as a always blanket disclaimer, these are not final opinions. These are not final thoughts. We have so much more information coming, including what we hear from you guys. We want to hear what guys you like, what prospects you're in on, what guys you might be out on already, although I think it's a little early to be totally out on players, but to have reservations, absolutely okay. There's a lot of guys, a guy that comes to mind that was, supposed to be a first-round pick in rookie drafts next year. Trey Benson, we didn't draft today. We left him off the board. Brian Thomas has been having a solid year. We left him off the board. Jalen Polk.
Devontae Walker, I like him a lot.
Devontae Walker, yep, he's had an interesting season to say the least. There's a lot of guys out there that, we want to hear about, we want to dive into more. We're just scratching the surface of the second round of this class, and we'll continue to pile on draft rounds as we get closer and closer to the draft, especially when we really know the full picture of what we're looking at for this class and not having to speculate as much who's staying, who's going, whatnot. And as everything rolls on, I hope you guys stick around to like the video, comment again who you're looking for. What idiots were we to leave on the board at the 301 that you would draft here? What mistake did we make there? For sure, let us know in the comments, and any other players you like, dislike, so on and so forth. Definitely subscribe if you're new. Don't miss another mock draft on the channel. Appreciate the heck out of everybody watching. If you want more of us, head to patreon.com/Dynasty Rewind. You can get in a 7-day free trial in the Discord or bonus podcast as well. But with all of that said, we'll see you in the next one. Until then, I hope that y'all have a good one.